A house fire in Milwaukee's Nash Park neighborhood quickly turned into a homicide investigation.
Witnesses say Rogers was at this house to pack her bags when she was shot and killed. Experts in domestic violence say an attempt to escape can be a dangerous time.
Inside a burned home near 83rd Street and Vienna Avenue, responders uncover a reality far more deliberate than an accident. Nikia Rogers is found lifeless, and the damage around her starts to look like something staged rather than spontaneous. What appears at first glance to be destruction caused by flames quickly shifts into something far more controlled, far more intentional. Hours earlier, before any sirens cut through the night, Nikia had reached out to someone she trusted. She explained she was heading back to the house to gather what was left of her belongings, framing it as something she needed to finish. The tone wasn't frantic, but it wasn't casual either. It carried a sense of closure, like a task she had already decided must be done. After arriving, she sent one more message. This time she mentioned Ernest. Physically fine, she said, but not mentally. That distinction lingered. It was the last time anyone heard from her. When investigators begin piecing things together, the medical findings remove any doubt about what happened first. Nikia had been shot twice, once in the head, once in the back, before any fire ever started. A container of lighter fluid sits nearby, and signs on her body confirm she was exposed to flames only after death. That sequence matters. It means the fire wasn't the cause, it was the cover. Neighbors begin adding fragments to the timeline, and those details narrow the window even further.
The call from the neighbor lady that she was in my house because there was a fire at the house adjacent to theirs and they were afraid it would spread to theirs. I guess windows were cracking or something, and it was quite an inferno according to what she...
As daylight stretches across the scene, investigators remain on site, working through the burned structure piece by piece. They process the house, check the garage, remove a damaged vehicle, and collect anything that might explain what led to those final hours. Friends and family begin to speak, raising concerns about possible domestic violence, though authorities have yet to confirm that direction publicly. At that moment, one thing is clear. The timeline has tightened to just a few hours, and somewhere within that window, everything changed. And as the investigation pushes forward, one question refuses to settle. If the fire was meant to erase what happened, what exactly was someone trying to hide? By the time investigators begin mapping out Nikia Rogers' life, one thing becomes immediately clear. This isn't someone who lived in fragments. At 36, she had built structure into her days, working in medical billing at Aetna while maintaining a rhythm that reflected discipline and self-reliance. Her path had taken her from Chicago to Milwaukee, where she settled into a routine that wasn't accidental, but carefully shaped over time. That consistency defined her. It also makes what follows feel even more difficult to place. But a routine only tells part of the story. The stronger impression came from how she connected with people, because Nikia didn't approach relationships casually or from a distance. She showed up fully, offering attention and care without hesitation, and those around her didn't just notice it, they experienced it in ways that stayed with them long after. You can trace that openness across everything she did, from everyday interactions to the way she chose to express appreciation. That expression often lived online, not as performance, but as a record of what mattered to her. Photos, captions, shared moments, they reflected intention rather than impulse, a way of preserving bonds she considered permanent rather than temporary. She treated relationships as something to invest in, not something to rotate through, and that mindset shaped the circle she built around herself. It's within that circle that Ernest Terrell Blackney appears. Their connection didn't emerge from similarity. Ernest, at 47, carried a lifestyle built around movement, travel, motorcycles, constant motion, while Nikia's life leaned toward order and predictability in Milwaukee. The contrast was obvious, but instead of creating distance, it introduced something she seemed drawn toward. He brought a different pace, one that pulled her out of routine and into experiences that felt less structured, more spontaneous. And rather than resist it, she embraced that shift. Over time, what began as two separate worlds started to overlap in visible ways. They spent time together consistently, appeared side by side at gatherings, and built patterns that, from the outside, suggested stability. This wasn't a connection kept private or undefined. Nikia made it visible. She shared moments that framed the relationship as meaningful, something she was willing to stand behind publicly rather than keep in the background. By December 2021, that clarity turned into something even more direct. Marking 5 years together, she posted a message that didn't leave room for interpretation. Good, bad, right, wrong, ups and downs. You have been an amazing partner, my motivator, my support system, literally the one person that has enough patience to deal with me. The words continued, describing someone she believed stayed steady through difficulty, someone she credited with bringing balance into her life. But relationships don't always shift in ways others can see. Over time, the tone between them began to change quietly, reshaping how interactions felt behind closed doors while everything visible remained consistent. Photos still appeared, messages still carried warmth. Yet privately, something else was forming. Tension that didn't announce itself loudly but settled in gradually, altering the rhythm of their connection. Those closest to Nikia noticed it first, not through dramatic moments, but through subtle differences in how she described things. Ernest's behavior began to move in a different direction. Conversations that once flowed easily started to carry pressure, as if routine exchanges required explanation or defense. Questions turned into doubts, and doubts evolved into something heavier. Jealousy didn't appear all at once. It built step by step, shaping how he interpreted ordinary situations. Nikia tried to manage it. She reassured him, explained herself, attempted to calm the concerns rather than escalate them. But the pattern didn't ease. It deepened. As that shift continued, his reactions became harder to anticipate. At times, he still presented the same version others recognized, calm, engaged, even affectionate. Then that tone would break, replaced by agitation that changed the atmosphere instantly. Accusations of infidelity surfaced more often, even when they didn't align with reality, and his conviction in those beliefs didn't fade with reassurance. It created an environment where stability no longer felt consistent, where each interaction carried uncertainty about how it might turn. Nikia didn't bring this into public view. Instead, she shared it selectively, speaking with people she trusted about what was happening away from everyone else. In those conversations, she used words that stood out. She described Ernest as physically okay, but mentally not. That distinction mattered because it pointed to something deeper than disagreement, something affecting how he processed situations around him. The connection that once felt secure no longer offered the same sense of safety, even if nothing outwardly appeared different. Then August 15, 2022, introduced a turning point that couldn't be managed privately. Inside a Milwaukee courtroom, Ernest Terrell Blackney stood before a judge and admitted guilt to second-degree sexual assault of a child involving a 13-year-old. That moment removed uncertainty. What had previously been denied or explained away became defined in a single statement. Prosecutors pushed for immediate custody, emphasizing the seriousness of the offense and potential risk. The judge declined, keeping the $5,000 bond unchanged. He left the courtroom that day and returned to the same environment, the same routines, and the same relationship. Only now, everything carried a different weight. Before that plea, there had been room for doubt, space where explanations could exist. After it, that space closed. For Nikia, it changed how she viewed everything around her. Conversations became sharper. Questions no longer faded. She began challenging inconsistencies directly, refusing to accept answers that didn't align with what had now been confirmed. That shift introduced friction that didn't resolve. It built. His reactions changed alongside it, with suspicion intensifying and accusations becoming more direct, less restrained. The admission in court didn't stabilize anything between them. It disrupted whatever balance had been holding. And within that tension, Nikia reached a point where staying no longer felt possible, even if leaving required careful steps rather than a single break. So she didn't announce anything. She didn't stage a moment. Instead, she began separating her life gradually, removing her belongings piece by piece, creating distance in a way that wouldn't escalate the situation. By the final days of August, that process was already underway. Some of her things were gone, others remained. The separation had started, but it hadn't finished yet. That exact space, between deciding to leave and actually being gone, is where the silence on Nikia's phone first appeared. The silence didn't start with the fire. It began earlier, in something much smaller, a message that never received an answer. That same evening, Ernest texted Nikia, telling her he had food ready. It looked ordinary, almost routine, but nothing came back. No reply, no follow-up. From that point on, her phone stopped reflecting her voice, and the gap that followed would only grow more unsettling as investigators later pieced it together. When authorities began analyzing digital activity, they ran into something that didn't fit the timeline they were constructing. Messages continued to leave Nikia's phone after she had already died, and the tone inside them didn't sound like her. The phrasing felt abrupt, detached, inconsistent with how she usually communicated with friends. That mismatch raised immediate suspicion that someone else had taken control of the device, using it to send statements that felt more like warnings than conversation. One exchange stood out quickly. A message read, "You should have left her alone." The recipient pushed back, asking who was actually sending these texts, and the response came without hesitation. "She dead." That alone shifted the tone of the entire case, but it didn't stop there. When the friend asked directly if it was Terrell, Ernest's middle name, the reply came back with a single word, "Yes." In that moment, attention narrowed, and the investigation moved with new urgency. At the same time, another detail complicated the situation further. Nikia's car was no longer at the house. That absence meant whatever had happened didn't remain confined to one location. It extended outward, creating multiple unknowns that investigators now had to track simultaneously. Leads began to form, and officers worked through them quickly, aware they were dealing with someone whose behavior was escalating rather than stabilizing. The pattern they were seeing didn't reflect control. It suggested volatility, something unpredictable that hadn't yet run its course. Around 5 a.m., one individual received a call from him. He said he was in the woods. He apologized briefly. Then the connection ended without explanation, leaving more questions than answers. But that wasn't the last contact. Roughly 30 minutes later, he arrived in person at that same location. By then, his condition told its own story. Rain covered his clothing and blood was visible. He asked for fresh clothes, then began speaking in a way that removed any ambiguity. He said Nikia had forced his hand. Then he admitted he had shot her. His explanation moved between justification and confession, blending claims that she planned to leave with accusations that she had been unfaithful. Alongside that, he acknowledged setting the house on fire, damaging vehicles, and destroying property connected to the scene.
The knock on the fire happened real quick. We were able to knock down the bulk of the fire rapidly.
But what firefighters found while inside was even more shocking. Police say crews discovered a 36-year-old woman shot to death. Friends and family identifying her as Nikia Rogers and say they fear this was yet another deadly case of domestic violence in our city.
At one point, he made a statement that stood out. He said he didn't deserve to live, but that mindset didn't stop what came next. After leaving, he encountered another man with a vehicle. Armed, he confronted him and demanded control. The situation didn't stretch out or negotiate itself. The presence of the weapon decided the outcome. He forced the man into a trailer, locked him inside, and took the vehicle, adding another layer of escalation to an already unfolding situation. From there, his movement became harder to track. He continued through the area without a clear direction, leaving behind a trail of actions but no fixed destination. Days passed without his location being confirmed, and the search remained active as investigators worked to connect each piece, messages, movement, and behavior into a complete picture. And as that picture formed, one reality became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a sequence that ended at the house. It was still in motion, with an outcome no one could yet predict. While the manhunt continued, the public conversation was already swelling, fueled not just by the loss of Nikia Rogers, but by the disturbing sequence tied to it. Near 83rd Street and Vienna Avenue, where the house once stood, people began leaving flowers without ceremony. No crowds, just quiet acknowledgments, marking a space that now carried a different weight. While those questions spread, the search remained active. Ernest had not been located, and investigators continued working through leads, tracking movement across the area. Then eventually, a vehicle connected to him surfaced. Officers moved in, initiating what was meant to be a controlled traffic stop, the kind designed to contain a situation rather than escalate it. But this one didn't follow that pattern. Instead of complying, he accelerated and pulled away, turning that moment into a pursuit through Milwaukee streets. The movement pushed into more active areas, including the downtown corridor near Juneau Avenue and Edison Street, where regular evening activity continued around people who had no connection to what was unfolding. The chase carried through those streets until the vehicle could no longer continue. Once it stopped, the situation shifted instantly. Ernest exited and opened fire. There was no pause, no negotiation, no space to slow things down. Officers returned fire in response, confronting an immediate threat that had already escalated beyond control. In that exchange, Ernest Terrell Blackney was struck and died at the scene.
A total of 94 gunshots in just over 30 seconds.
We have to make sure that we're doing the right decision for the right reasons. And as you can see in this particular situation, who we're chasing and the reason for and what happened to have us engage in that, yeah, it was a tough one that night.
But the consequences didn't end there. There's no courtroom ending to this case. No verdict read aloud, no cross-examinations, no final moment where responsibility is formally weighed in front of a jury. When Ernest Terrell Blackney died, the legal process stopped with him, cutting off any chance for Nikia Rogers' case to unfold in court. What's left is not a clean ending, but a fractured one. A man who never stood trial, a woman whose life ended before she could fully step away, and a family left holding questions that don't resolve neatly. And when I look at this case, I don't see a single breaking point. I see a chain of decisions, each one allowing the situation to continue without interruption until it reached a point where it couldn't be undone. What went wrong here wasn't hidden. The warning signs existed and prosecutors raised them, but the response didn't match the urgency required in that moment. That gap, those 10 days, became everything.
Our family lost a loving gem. She was a happy person. She was a loving person. Always wanted to celebrate.
If this story stays with you, pass it on, because awareness isn't just reflection. It's one of the few ways these patterns get recognized before they repeat.